They laughed at his stupid helmet idea until Japanese snipers burned through ammo triple speed. It was February 3rd, 1945. The morning air over northern Luzon was heavy and humid. The sun had not yet cleared the ridges, and the low-lying fog clung to the jungle floor. Small insects buzzed around the damp leaves, and the occasional bird call echoed from the trees. The 6th Infantry Division, part of the American forces advancing through the Philippines, was moving cautiously through a narrow ridge line northeast of San Jose. Sergeant Daniel Huxley, 26, crouched behind a fallen log. He was a farmer from Fayetteville, Arkansas, drafted into the Army in 1943. Before the war, his life had revolved around planting and harvesting, tending livestock, and repairing fences. He had no interest in the military beyond duty, but when the draft board called, he had left his farm and joined the infantry. Now, 2 years later, he found himself in one of the most dangerous theaters of the Pacific War. Huxley's unit had been tasked with clearing Japanese snipers from the ridge to secure the road for advancing infantry. The enemy snipers were experienced, highly disciplined, and expertly concealed in the dense jungle. They could hold a position for days, firing only when they were certain of a kill. Every movement above cover could mean death. Huxley's team consisted of 10 men under Lieutenant Reeves. Among them was Private Mercer, 19, a young recruit from Kentucky, nervous but eager to prove himself. The platoon's objective was straightforward but deadly: identify sniper positions, suppress them if possible, and secure the ridge without drawing heavy casualties. The problem was that the Japanese had been holding this ridge for weeks, and the Americans had already lost men attempting to advance. Huxley had spent the past hours studying the terrain. He noticed subtle patterns the others overlooked: the faint disturbance in leaf litter, small broken branches, and patches of mud that indicated recent movement. Unlike the younger soldiers, he had experience reading subtle signs from his time on the farm, noticing where an animal had passed, identifying the slightest difference in soil, predicting where danger could emerge. That knowledge now gave him an edge in combat. Around 6:15 a.m., Huxley prepared a plan. He removed his helmet, examined it for dents, scratches, and traces of previous close calls. Instead of putting it on his head, he attached it to a long stick, securing the chin strap so it would not fall. He intended to use it as a decoy, raising it carefully above the log to appear as a soldier's head moving cautiously in the ridgeline. The men behind him watched in silence. Some shook their heads, whispering complaints about this stupid idea, unsure if Huxley's plan could work under fire. Mercer muttered, "You really think that'll fool anyone?" Huxley did not answer. He had learned early in the war that hesitation could be deadly. He raised the stick slowly, just enough to be visible. The jungle seemed to pause. There was no sound except for the faint rustle of leaves in the wind and distant insect noises. Then a shot rang out. The helmet jerked violently from the impact, spinning slightly on the stick. Another shot followed, and then a third. Each bullet struck the helmet with precision. The sniper was firing rapidly, trying to hit the target before it disappeared. Huxley lowered the decoy and signaled the men to advance cautiously. He could see the tension in their faces shift slightly. They were still cautious, but their expressions reflected a growing sense of hope. The Japanese sniper had been forced to fire repeatedly, wasting ammunition in a pattern he had not intended. Huxley's observation, drawn from years of reading subtle patterns in the environment, had given the platoon a tactical advantage. The plan for the day was clear. Huxley would continue using the decoy to manipulate the sniper's fire while the platoon moved along the ridge, securing small pockets of territory. His task, dangerous but simple in execution, was to act as bait, drawing enemy attention away from the rest of the squad. For Huxley, this was not heroism. It was survival. For the others, it was a test of trust. The morning air remained thick and humid, but for the first time that day, the soldiers moved with slightly more confidence. Huxley, the farm boy-turned-soldier, had discovered a small but crucial way to disrupt an enemy who had seemed untouchable. The ridge ahead was still dangerous, the snipers were still hidden, and every step could cost a life. But Huxley's plan had changed the calculus. For now, the odds had shifted slightly in their favor. By mid-morning on February 3rd, 1945, the platoon had advanced only a few hundred meters along the ridge. The dense jungle forced them to move in single file. Every step had to be calculated. Roots, loose soil, and fallen branches made even a normal walk treacherous, but under sniper fire, each misstep could be fatal. Huxley led cautiously, carrying his helmet decoy in one hand and his rifle in the other. His eyes scanned the ridge ahead, noting the subtle inconsistencies in the foliage. Leaves that should have rustled in the morning breeze were still. Small birds that normally fled at movement remained motionless. He had learned to read these signs quickly. The sniper had already been active. Previous patrols had reported men hit by single bullets from a hidden position somewhere on the ridge. The sniper was disciplined, patient, and precise, likely trained to fire only when certain of a kill. He had no interest in wasting ammunition or revealing his location. Huxley's task was to disrupt that. By presenting an isolated target, the helmet decoy, he could force the sniper to make a choice: take the bait and risk revealing his position, or hold fire and let the squad advance. Private Mercer, walking behind Huxley, whispered nervously, "You really think this will work?" Huxley didn't respond. There was no time for argument. He lifted the helmet decoy carefully, letting it rise just above a fallen log that masked the rest of his body. The squad froze. Time seemed to slow as the first shot cracked through the air, hitting the helmet with a loud clang. The impact made the decoy jerk violently. Huxley held it steady. The sniper fired again and again. 3 bullets struck the helmet, each one precise and deliberate. The enemy was reacting exactly as Huxley had predicted: rapid, controlled fire aimed at what he wanted them to perceive as a human head. The decoy had done its job. By drawing the sniper's attention, Huxley had given the squad a critical window to advance 20 meters along the ridge. The men moved cautiously, crouching behind trees and fallen logs, adjusting their positions while the sniper continued to waste ammunition on the helmet. Lieutenant Reeves, observing from just behind Huxley, nodded subtly. He had been skeptical at first, but now it was clear Huxley's plan was working. The squad continued forward. Huxley alternated the position of the helmet decoy, letting it peek from different angles to manipulate the sniper's aim. He monitored the rifle flashes and listened carefully for each shot. The sniper's firing pattern was becoming erratic, his discipline breaking under the pressure of repeated, impossible-to-ignore targets. Hours passed. The jungle remained tense and silent except for the sharp cracks of gunfire. The squad advanced in short bursts, each movement calculated and deliberate. Huxley had become both scout and bait, his presence dictating the pace of the entire platoon. By late afternoon, they reached a small clearing in the ridge where the sniper's position could be observed indirectly. The Japanese rifleman, young but highly trained, had revealed signs of fatigue. Spent cartridges littered the ground, and the rhythm of his shots had slowed. Huxley signaled to the squad to hold position. They would wait for nightfall to continue the advance, using the decoy intermittently to keep the sniper distracted. That night, in the humid and oppressive darkness of the jungle, the platoon huddled together. Men cleaned weapons, checked ammunition, and whispered quietly to each other. Huxley sat slightly apart, studying the terrain and reviewing the morning's events. His helmet lay beside him, still bearing dents from the sniper's bullets. It had proven itself more valuable than any rifle that day. The soldiers understood something important. This was not just a physical battle. It was a psychological one. Huxley's simple idea had forced the sniper to fire repeatedly, breaking his patience and confidence. The platoon had advanced without significant casualties. In the jungles of Luzon, that was rare. For Huxley, the battle was far from over. The ridge ahead still held enemy positions, more snipers, and the ever-present threat of ambush. But he now had a tool, a method, and a growing sense of confidence. One carefully placed decoy could change the outcome of an engagement. As the men settled in for the night, Huxley thought back to his farm. The skill he had learned in reading the land, understanding patterns, and anticipating movement was keeping men alive. In this jungle, knowledge, patience, and observation were more valuable than courage alone. Tomorrow, they would move forward again, and Huxley knew that his decoy and his ability to anticipate the enemy would be the difference between survival and death. The next morning, February 4th, 1945, the ridge was quieter than usual. The sun had risen higher, burning off the morning fog, but the heat was already oppressive. Sweat soaked the soldiers' uniforms before they had even begun their advance. Each step forward required careful placement, balancing on slippery roots and uneven soil. Every shadow could hide a rifle barrel. Every rustle of leaves could be a sniper preparing to fire. Huxley led the platoon again, helmet decoy in hand. His mind was focused, analyzing the terrain and imagining the sniper's likely vantage points. The enemy had already demonstrated patience and accuracy. One wrong move, and the platoon could lose men in an instant. Lieutenant Reeves, walking a few meters behind, watched Huxley closely. The sergeant had become the informal tactical leader during these small-scale engagements. His suggestions and improvisations had saved lives the previous day, and Reeves had learned to trust his judgment. Huxley paused near a fallen tree, surveying the ridge above. The foliage was dense, but he could see subtle signs. A branch snapped at an unusual angle, a cluster of leaves that seemed undisturbed for too long, and a patch of mud that had not dried evenly. He was certain a sniper was hidden just beyond the bend, likely positioned to cover the narrow corridor the platoon had to cross. He set the helmet decoy on a stick, carefully angling it so that it appeared like a human head emerging cautiously from cover. The other soldiers crouched low, rifles ready, but held back to avoid drawing the sniper's attention prematurely. Huxley raised the decoy slowly. The first shot cracked through the air almost immediately. The helmet jerked violently, but stayed upright. Another shot followed, then a third. Each bullet struck the decoy in quick succession. The sniper was reacting exactly as Huxley had calculated, too focused on the apparent soldier to realize it was a decoy. Huxley dropped the decoy behind the log, moved forward, and raised it again from a slightly different angle. The sniper's firing became faster, less controlled. The first signs of panic appeared in the rhythm of the shots. He was burning through ammunition at a rate Huxley had predicted, but the enemy could not anticipate. The platoon advanced in short, controlled bursts, taking advantage of every misfire and distraction. Private Mercer, initially skeptical, followed Huxley's lead. Each time the decoy moved, the sniper reacted immediately, exposing his frustration and leaving gaps that the soldiers used to gain ground. Within an hour, Huxley realized the full impact of the tactic. The sniper's discipline had broken. He was no longer firing sparingly, conserving bullets. He was firing repeatedly, desperately trying to hit what he thought was a target, wasting rounds, and revealing himself to the advancing platoon. Lieutenant Reeves motioned for the men to hold. Huxley placed the helmet decoy on a branch this time, leaving it partially visible from multiple angles. The sniper fired rapidly, then paused, hesitating. Huxley noted the hesitation. The enemy had been forced out of his rhythm. The psychological advantage now clearly rested with the Americans. By late afternoon, the platoon had advanced several hundred meters further along the ridge than any previous attempt. They had avoided casualties, a rare achievement in an area that had claimed men from every platoon that had tried to move forward. The decoy had drawn fire, broken the enemy's patience, and allowed the soldiers to make progress without exposing themselves unnecessarily. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridges and the jungle cooled slightly, Huxley cleaned his rifle and examined the helmet decoy. The dents and scratches from repeated shots stood out against the green and brown of the jungle floor. It was a simple tool, but it had saved lives. The men gathered around for a brief rest. Their exhaustion was visible, sweat-streaked faces, torn uniforms, and weary movements. Still, there was an unmistakable sense of relief. Huxley's method had worked. It had changed the dynamics of the battlefield, at least temporarily, giving them a tactical edge that few soldiers could claim. Huxley sat slightly apart, quietly studying the ridge ahead. The enemy was still out there. Other snipers, perhaps positioned in hidden nests, would continue to challenge them. But for the first time, the platoon felt they had a way to fight back intelligently. One carefully placed decoy could manipulate the enemy, turning his discipline against him. The helmet had become more than a piece of equipment. It had become a tool for survival. And Huxley, the farm boy who never wanted war, had discovered a way to use observation, patience, and creativity to give his men a fighting chance in a jungle that had claimed too many lives already. By February 5th, 1945, the platoon had spent 2 full days advancing along the ridge. The heat was oppressive, the air thick with humidity, and the jungle dense and unrelenting. The men were exhausted from long hours of moving through uneven terrain under the constant threat of sniper fire. Every footstep required caution. Every glance toward the canopy demanded calculation. Huxley had risen before dawn again, quietly inspecting the ridge ahead. The sniper they had engaged the previous day was still active somewhere above them, likely repositioned but still watching. Huxley's method of using the helmet decoy had forced the enemy into repeated mistakes, but he knew the sniper could adapt if given time. His task was to maintain the pressure, to exploit the enemy's reliance on discipline against him. Huxley advanced slowly, keeping low and using natural cover. The helmet was tied to a long stick, and he carried it carefully so that it could be raised at multiple angles without exposing himself. He paused behind a fallen tree, noting the subtle differences in the terrain. A branch angled slightly, leaves flattened against the soil, and a patch of mud still damp, all indicators of the sniper's recent movement. He raised the helmet decoy above the log. Instantly, a shot cracked through the morning air. The helmet jerked violently. Another shot followed, then a third. Each impact confirmed what Huxley had anticipated. The sniper was firing quickly, abandoning patience in an effort to hit the target. Huxley lowered the decoy, repositioned it slightly, and raised it again. The pattern repeated. The sniper's firing became increasingly erratic. He was no longer taking careful, calculated shots. He was reacting with frustration, each bullet spent on what was not a real threat. The platoon moved forward in short, deliberate bursts, using the distraction to gain ground. Private Mercer followed closely, his initial skepticism replaced by cautious trust. The squad moved as one, carefully monitoring the rifle flashes above them while maintaining cover. Lieutenant Reeves observed the sniper's reaction through a small gap in the canopy. The enemy's firing had slowed temporarily, then increased again in a rapid, uncontrolled sequence. Huxley recognized that the sniper was experiencing a breakdown in discipline. By forcing repeated, urgent shots, he had pushed the enemy out of the careful, methodical mindset that made snipers deadly. Over the next hour, Huxley continued to manipulate the decoy, moving it between cover points and varying its visibility. The sniper's shots became predictable, easier to anticipate, and ultimately less effective. Huxley had created an advantage that did not rely on brute force or superior numbers, but on observation, timing, and psychological pressure. By midday, the platoon had advanced further than they had in any prior engagement along the ridge. The sniper, likely frustrated and low on ammunition, had revealed subtle signs of fatigue. The shots were slower, the flashes were more obvious, and the firing pattern was inconsistent. Huxley had effectively forced the enemy into mistakes that would have been fatal under different circumstances. When the squad paused to rest, the men exchanged quiet, relieved glances. Their equipment was soaked in sweat, their uniforms torn and stained, but they were alive. The helmet decoy lay between Huxley and the ridge, scarred by bullets but intact. It was a simple tool, yet it had given them a strategic advantage that conventional tactics had not. Huxley understood the significance. In the jungle, survival was often determined not by courage or strength alone, but by understanding the enemy and exploiting weaknesses. By forcing the sniper to abandon discipline, he had created opportunities for the platoon to advance with minimal casualties. As the afternoon light faded, Huxley prepared to continue the push along the ridge. Other sniper positions likely remained hidden, and the jungle itself could conceal danger at any moment. But he had learned that intelligence, observation, and careful improvisation could turn even a single, vulnerable tool into a decisive advantage. The helmet decoy had not won the engagement by itself, but it had shifted the balance. The sniper's patience was broken, and the platoon had gained both ground and confidence. In the jungles of Luzon, that was enough to tip the scales between life and death. By February 6, 1945, the platoon approached a ridge that intelligence reports described as heavily defended. The Japanese had established at least 3 sniper nests along the high ground, each concealed in dense foliage, camouflaged with leaves and earth, and positioned to cover the narrow paths the Americans had to traverse. For any standard infantry unit, this ridge was considered nearly impassable without heavy losses. Huxley led the squad in single file, moving slowly along the narrow trail. The men were tense, carrying only what was essential: rifles, ammunition, water, and grenades. Their uniforms were soaked, stained with mud and sweat, and their faces reflected the strain of continuous engagement. Private Mercer, walking behind Huxley, kept his eyes on the canopy, flinching at every snapping twig or bird call. The mission was clear: secure the ridge, neutralize the snipers, and allow the remainder of the company to advance. Huxley had already proven the effectiveness of the helmet decoy with a single sniper. Today, he would need to adapt the tactic to a more complex environment. He stopped near a fallen tree that provided partial cover and set up 3 helmet decoys on sticks, each tied to branches or vines to mimic movement. One decoy peeked over a small rise, the second near a cluster of bamboo, and the third slightly ahead, partially obscured by leaves. He coordinated with Lieutenant Reeves, who positioned the rest of the squad in shallow cover along the ridge. Huxley raised the first helmet decoy. Immediately, 3 rifle shots cracked from different directions. The snipers were firing simultaneously, drawn to the apparent positions of the soldiers. The decoys were doing exactly what he had intended, forcing the enemy to reveal their locations and expend ammunition. He quickly dropped the first decoy and raised the second, then the third. The snipers shifted their fire from one fake target to another, growing increasingly erratic. Huxley observed their reactions carefully. Their discipline, which had made them deadly, was now compromised. The repeated, rapid-fire response indicated frustration and fatigue. The squad used the distraction to advance incrementally. Each time a sniper focused on a decoy, Huxley moved another one into view. The men followed, staying low, advancing only when the decoys absorbed fire. Over the course of 20 minutes, 2 of the 3 sniper nests exhausted a significant portion of their ammunition. The remaining nest fired sporadically, its shots hurried and uncoordinated. Huxley's approach was methodical. He alternated the decoys, maintained concealment, and monitored the sniper positions for subtle changes. Spent cartridges, shifts in foliage, and patterns in rifle flashes. His understanding of the terrain, combined with the tactical improvisation of the helmet decoys, allowed the platoon to gain critical ground. By late morning, the ridge had been secured without major casualties. The soldiers took a brief pause, catching their breath and checking their weapons. Huxley inspected the helmet decoys, now riddled with bullet holes. The simple tools had forced the enemy to fire on illusions, breaking the careful rhythm that had made them so dangerous. Lieutenant Reeves approached, nodding in approval. "I wasn't sure at first," he said, "but that worked better than I imagined." Huxley said nothing. He simply observed the ridge ahead. He knew the Japanese forces were adaptive and that other threats could be waiting further along. But for now, the platoon had achieved a significant tactical success. The ridge, which had once seemed impenetrable, was now in their control. Huxley's helmet decoy strategy had not only saved lives, but had demonstrated the power of ingenuity and observation in the dense, dangerous jungles of Luzon. The soldiers moved forward cautiously, their confidence growing with each successful step. Huxley carried the remaining decoys with him, prepared to use them again if necessary. In the context of the jungle, every advantage counted. The battlefield was unforgiving, and even small victories could determine survival. Huxley understood that this ridge was more than a tactical objective. It was a test of resourcefulness, patience, and the ability to turn the enemy's discipline against them. The helmet decoy had proven itself not just as a tool, but as a strategy that could change the outcome of an engagement. By February 7th, 1945, the platoon had been moving continuously along the ridges and narrow valleys of northern Luzon for nearly a week. The heat was relentless, the humidity oppressive, and the jungle dense with undergrowth that slowed their progress. Every step required careful attention. Even a small movement could draw the attention of hidden Japanese snipers. The men were exhausted. Their uniforms were soaked with sweat and dirt, their faces marked with fatigue, and their hands blistered from carrying heavy packs and rifles. Many had gone without proper rest or meals for over 24 hours, moving under the constant threat of unseen enemies. Huxley, however, remained focused. He had learned the value of patience and observation. Each decoy had been strategically placed, each movement measured to draw fire without exposing the squad. The psychological effect on the snipers had been clear. Repeated, futile shots had forced the enemy to expend ammunition, break concentration, and reveal positions. As the platoon approached a wide valley flanked by high ridges, the atmosphere changed. The valley was shrouded in early morning fog, dense and clinging to the ground, reducing visibility to a few dozen feet. The silence was unnerving. No shots had been fired for nearly an hour. Even the usual calls of birds or insects seemed subdued. The men stopped, crouching behind fallen trees and undergrowth, weapons ready. Huxley carefully selected 3 positions for his helmet decoys along the ridge's approach. One peaked above a small rise, another behind a cluster of bamboo, and the third near a fallen log. He raised the first decoy slightly. The fog swallowed it, and for a tense moment, there was nothing. Then 5 shots cracked almost simultaneously from the ridge. The decoys had drawn fire from multiple snipers, forcing them to reveal their positions in a single, chaotic burst. The platoon advanced immediately, moving in short, controlled bursts, using the cover of trees and brush. Each time a sniper focused on a decoy, the soldiers gained critical ground. The fog created confusion for the defenders. Huxley alternated the positions of the decoys, manipulating the sniper's fire and preventing them from targeting real soldiers effectively. The enemy, already fatigued from continuous engagement over the previous days, was now firing hurriedly with less precision. Within 20 minutes, the platoon had reached the center of the valley. 2 of the 3 sniper nests were effectively neutralized. The soldiers had captured them or forced the occupants to retreat with minimal ammunition remaining. The final nest fired sporadically but ineffectively, leaving the path ahead clear enough for the company to advance safely. The men paused to catch their breath. Their exhaustion was palpable, but so was a sense of relief. For the first time in several days, they had moved through the terrain without significant casualties. Huxley inspected the decoys. Bullet marks covered the helmets and sticks, but they had performed flawlessly. The simple, improvised tools had forced the enemy to overcommit, creating openings that a standard assault could not have achieved. Lieutenant Reeves approached Huxley, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've saved lives today," he said quietly. "I don't think we would have made it otherwise." Huxley nodded, but said nothing. His focus remained on the surrounding jungle. He knew other snipers could be nearby. Other ambushes could await further along the ridge. Victory was temporary, survival never guaranteed. The platoon moved forward again, cautiously securing the valley and its approaches. The soldiers' morale had improved. Even Private Mercer, who had doubted Huxley's ideas at first, moved with more confidence. The helmet decoy strategy had proved its worth. By evening, the valley was fully under American control. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the quiet of a battlefield temporarily cleared. Men cleaned weapons, assessed injuries, and prepared for the next phase of their advance. Huxley sat apart from the others, examining the helmet decoys and planning for the following day. He understood that this method had shifted the balance in their favor, at least temporarily. The combination of observation, patience, and improvisation had allowed a small platoon to neutralize multiple sniper threats and secure critical ground. In the jungles of Luzon, where every ridge and valley concealed danger, Huxley had turned a simple idea into a tactical advantage. The helmet decoy had forced the enemy to react, overcommit, and reveal themselves. It was a small victory in a vast, brutal campaign, but it was a victory that saved lives and gave the men a chance to continue fighting. By March 1945, the campaign in northern Luzon was drawing to a close. The 6th Infantry Division had advanced through ridges, valleys, and dense jungle, engaging Japanese forces at multiple points. The platoon that had followed Huxley now moved with a cautious confidence. They had survived ambushes, sniper fire, and the relentless heat and humidity of the jungle. Huxley, now 26 and carrying the weight of days spent under constant threat, reflected on what had allowed them to survive. It had not been strength, luck, or even courage alone. It had been observation, patience, and improvisation. And, most importantly, it had been the helmet decoy, a simple, improvised tool that had forced enemy snipers to reveal themselves, break discipline, and waste ammunition. The platoon had lost men, but many had survived because of that tactic. Huxley had learned to read the environment like he once read farmland, noting small differences in the terrain, anticipating movement, predicting risk. Those skills, honed on a quiet farm in Arkansas, had proven invaluable on a jungle ridge thousands of miles from home. When the war finally ended, Huxley returned to Fayetteville. He walked the familiar fields, now scarred only by time and memory rather than battle. The farm was unchanged, but he was. The lessons of the jungle, the tension, the constant danger, the necessity of careful observation remained with him. He kept his helmet, riddled with dents and scratches from the engagement, on a shelf in his barn. It was a quiet reminder of survival, of lives saved through ingenuity, and of a campaign that demanded every ounce of his focus and skill. Huxley rarely spoke of Luzon. When his son once asked what the war had been like, he offered only one measured sentence. Sometimes the difference between living and dying is a good idea and nobody believes in. The helmet decoy had not won the war. It had not changed the course of history, but it had changed the outcome for a small group of men, giving them the chance to survive long enough to return home. In the end, survival was often a product of observation, improvisation, and the courage to act when others doubted you. History rarely records the names of men like Huxley. They were not generals or strategists. They were ordinary soldiers, thrust into extraordinary circumstances, relying on skill, judgment, and the willingness to act in ways that seemed absurd at first. On the ridges of Luzon, a simple helmet on a stick had saved lives. It was a reminder that in war, small, carefully applied ideas could tip the balance between life and death. And for Huxley and his platoon, that small edge had made all the difference. As he worked the fields in the years after the war, Huxley would occasionally glance at that dented helmet and remember the jungle, the heat, the humidity, the tension, and the hidden rifles. He would remember the men who survived, the shots that missed, and the idea that had made it all possible. Sometimes, in the quiet of his barn, he would lift the helmet from its shelf and inspect the marks from the past, silently acknowledging that even the smallest, most unassuming ideas could save lives in the most dangerous of circumstances. War demanded bravery, skill, and endurance, but sometimes it demanded imagination. And that was the lesson Huxley carried home.